Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, deadly lessons, Mexico's battle over education standards. So who are the winners and losers? Stay with us. My co-host and digital producer is Omar Madar. He's been here all week, and there have been some dramatic images and videos about these protests in Mexico.
That's right. You know, we did actually catch some footage that was being live streamed last week by Uriel Rodriguez. He's a resident of Oaxaca, and he was there using Periscope to actually document the clashes that were taking place between protesters and federal police. Take a look at some of those footage.
Aquí están los policías federales, están gritando, están lanzando piedras hacia esta zona donde estamos. Es una zona habitacional. Están lanzando piedras hacia acá los policías, pero acaban de lanzarnos una granada directamente. Nos lanzaron una granada de gas.
Now, we're also live streaming this show right now on Facebook Live. You can visit our page at facebook.com/AJStream. And if you comment on the live feed over there, we're going to try to get some of those comments into the show.
Cries of police brutality are echoing across Mexico. They started in the southern state of Oaxaca, as Omar mentioned, where a powerful teachers union has been protesting education reforms. When a combative arm of the union set fire to vehicles and blocked a highway to protest the arrest of their leaders, Mexican police swooped in. Authorities initially denied sending in guns, but cameras captured another story. At least 8 people are dead, and thousands of students are out of school, as they often are in Oaxaca. The teachers union is a powerful force that determines who commands a classroom and who doesn't. So when the federal government unveiled standardized teacher testing, union members revolted. They say the reforms ignore the needs of Oaxaca's indigenous students and teachers, but critics say the union is rife with corruption, afraid of losing political power and sacrificing students' education in the process. So with us to discuss, visiting from Mexico City, Marco Fernandez. He's an educator researcher with Mexico Evalúa, a public policy group. In Oaxaca, Vladimir Flores is a correspondent with Radio Bilingüe. In Tijuana, Jennifer O'Donoghue is a research director with Mexicanos Primero, an education reform group. And in Mexico City, John Ackerman is editor-in-chief of the Mexican Law Review and a professor at the Autonomous University of Mexico. Welcome to the stream, everyone. John, are these reforms necessary?
Education is in a very difficult situation in Mexico, but the federal government has taken exactly the wrong strategy to improve education. Instead of investing more money in schools, in teachers, reducing class sizes, bringing running water to the schools. Almost 50% of the schools, especially in the south of the country, don't even have running water or functioning toilets. We could change, for instance, the content of education, more critical education, more participatory education. Education reform is necessary. The problem is that what Enrique Peña Nieto has done has imposed basically a labor reform. This is not an education reform. There's no educational content to it at all. It's a labor reform which is designed to exercise centralized control over particularly the more democratic participative unions in the south of the country, in Oaxaca, in Chiapas, in Michoacán, and Guerrero. This is part of a larger strategy to centralize power in the president's office and impose through blood and violence a neoliberal agenda, which not only includes education reform, but also includes oil privatization, fiscal, banking reforms, labor reforms. And so that's what this protest is all about. It's not just about standardized testing. It's about the south of Mexico resisting this neoliberal attack on tradition and our history.
Okay, John, some strong words there. When you were talking, I heard Marco give a huge sigh. What do you have to say about what John mentioned? Do you think the reforms are necessary?
Undoubtedly, it's necessary, the education reform. We have a problem first of quality, a huge problem of quality of education, of unequal access of educational opportunities among particularly the poor. And we have also a deep problem of corruption inside the education system. And unfortunately, this corruption system has taken away the growing budgets that educational system has had in the last 30 years. It is not a matter, in that sense, of resources. It is the matter of guaranteeing that these resources are used in what is required. Unfortunately, and it's not only the dissidence movement of the teachers union in the south of Mexico, but also the institutional part of the union that have used corruption and capture many of the key positions in the educational system in Oaxaca, in Michoacán, in every place in Mexico. And with this capture of key positions have in many ways forced the members of the union to follow their orders. In that sense, the democratic credentials that some claim that dissidents movement have to be put into question, or at least take it with a grain of salt. So in that sense, it is a required reform. It is not easy to implement because also the authority has committed a series of mistakes that I'm sure that we're going to be talking about during this program.
Yeah, but we do have some people in our online community who have some critiques of the reform. So we have a video comment here from Miguel. Let's check it out.
The Mexican educational reform was drafted with input from think tanks and the international experience. It lacks any understanding of the current Mexican realities, especially the rural areas. Therefore, the Mexican government must listen to the proposals that the teachers have. It is now in a position that it should negotiate its standing on the education reform.
Vladimir, what do you think of what Miguel is saying? Are the reforms taking into account the realities on the ground?
No, absolutely no. The key point of this educational reform is that it's excluding the diversity and cultural differences that we are living here in Oaxaca, especially in Oaxaca, but all over South Mexico, especially Guerrero, Chiapas, and Michoacán, of course. So the cultural differences are part of the key points of the educational system is not taking in consideration. I have to say that these legal reforms are also due with class. The social class is part of this exclusion system that is trying to privatize the education just with the logic of the global economical system. So the violence, as John said a moment ago, the violence, the blood, and the militarization of the whole territories of Oaxaca, Chiapas, Guerrero is due with they are trying to impose reforms that are not exactly debated. They are not trying to dialogue with the social actors. They are trying to impose violently.
Interesting. Jennifer, you heard there he said these reforms are being imposed. I want to throw something else at you. We spoke to the Director General of the Oaxaca State Education Institute, Moises Robles Cruz. This is what he told the stream about the reforms. He says it applies to Oaxaca because Oaxaca can't be an exception. We're standing firm in the implementation of the law, and we're giving job security to educators. And then in the midst of that all, between the conversations about the reform and then the protests that we've seen, he wants to know, what about the children? Have a look.
El mundo de los adultos, los líderes de organizaciones, partidos políticos, etcétera, que de pronto están presentes en este tema, pero dejan de tomar la voz de los niños y de los jóvenes, que es la razón de ser. Los niños, el mundo de los niños es desplazado a un lado, y el mundo de los adultos es el que domina. Y nunca le han preguntado qué quiere el niño, si quiere clases, si ese es el ejemplo que le da su maestro cuando está quemando un autobús.
Jennifer, he says children are pushed to the side.
I think that I would agree completely. I think, again, I mean, going back to your initial question about did we need this reform or not, I think it's extremely important to remember that the right to education really means the right to learn. And what we've seen in Mexico over the past few decades has been definitely an increase in terms of access and building more schools and all of that. But children are not learning. I mean, all of the indicators that we have, and they're imperfect indicators, and they measure sort of the most basic concepts around learning. And it's not everything of learning, but everything that we have, every different instrument that we have used to measure learning finds that more than half of children in Mexico, by the time that they're 15 years old, so they've spent 9 years in schools, are not learning even at the most basic levels. No? And so if we think about kids, and I'm here in Tijuana actually visiting migrant camps and migrant workers, both people who come here to the state and also people who want to go to the United States, many of them come from Oaxaca. And so I've been talking over the past 3 days about why they're here. And what they speak about is an education system that is failing young people. And I think, to me, I mean, I would disagree with John on the point that this reform is only a labor reform, because the most important piece of this education reform is the change to the constitutional amendment, which puts learning at the center of this reform. And so the government of Mexico is no longer responsible just to make sure that there are schools, but to really make sure that young people are learning. And I agree with John in the points that we need to think about the material conditions and we need to think about the content and the curriculum. But learning is a social process. I mean, all of the evidence that we have in this world shows that learning happens in a relationship between people. And so we have to think about who are the people, how are people arriving at schools, how are they, from young people, and what conditions are they arriving? Do they have the nutrition do they need? Do they have early childhood development opportunities? And then if we think about teachers, they have the support they need in terms of initial teacher preparation, ongoing teacher learning, and all of that. And I think that unfortunately in Mexico, this reform has boiled down to talking about a standardized test when that's not the heart of the reform.
John, I know that you want to respond, but let me toss this at you. I mean, we're talking about all these reforms, but there's also the violence angle that is very difficult to ignore at this point, given what has happened recently. We have people commenting on it on Twitter. We have Lewis over here who says, whatever the accusations are against the teachers union, it's not justifiable to use violence against the teachers and against the people. We have Gav over here who says, it's crazy Mexico is willing to go to these extremes for education reform, but not against the cartels. And then there's this mural over here in Oaxaca that says the reforms are introduced with blood. Can you talk a little bit about whatever you think of the reforms, what the government response has been?
I think if I could say one thing, I think clearly we're in a situation.
That was directed to John, but I love that you have so much to say, Jennifer. John was just trying to inch in there, so let's hear from John, and then we can open the floor.
There are two things. One is what mentioned Jennifer, the other one mentioned you guys at the table. One is the question of people. I'm glad that Jennifer mentions people. The problem with this education reform is precisely that it blames the teachers. It's all focused on passing these teachers through these standardized tests, and it directly affects their labor rights and their stability in employment. In any decent educational system, the teachers should be the center as the humans who are responsible for this education, of any kind of education reform. Everything should be based on supporting them, guaranteeing them labor stability, training, education, instead of forcing them to go through these standardized tests, which have very little to do with actually the quality of education. So you're going to evaluate.
And in that sense, I mean, I'm sure that you're right in terms of respect.
John, there were several points. Let's just pause for a moment, because as you were talking, Marco said that's not true. That's not true.
The education reform doesn't endanger the labor rights of the people. That is, I mean, if we're going to discuss this reform, we have to discuss it honoring the truth. I mean, it is not true that this education reform puts in danger the rights of the teachers. Precisely.
Okay, so you say that's not true.
It's
John
not true.
responds.
I mean, and there are problems undoubtedly in the implementation. But to say that they are putting the rights in danger, that is a lie.
If you show,
John and Marco, I love the enthusiasm. Two people talking at one time. I can't totally hear you. So I heard Marco say that's not true. John, do you then want to respond to that?
Aurelio Nuño has fired over 6,000 teachers over the last few months.
And John, for our international audience, Aurelio Nuño is?
Secretary of Education. He brags about this on press conferences every couple of weeks, that he's firing another couple thousand students. I mean, that's completely out of hand to say that this isn't part of the educational reform. The evaluation of the teachers is only based on standardized testing. The evaluation of teachers should be based on people visiting the schools, evaluating what the actual quality of education, and seeing whether, for instance, there's running water in the school, or whether the kids are actually learning directly, and what's the problem for that, instead of blaming the teacher. This is blaming the victim. These teachers are from their communities. Mexico has a very long history of humanistic, critical education, which goes back over 100 years. It's particularly strong in the South, in which teachers are not just, machines for teaching math and reading, but they're actually community leaders, and that's what the educational reform is running up against today.
I think if I could jump in around the evaluation, I think that, I mean, first of all, the evaluation in Mexico is not only the standardized test. I mean, there are 5 different aspects to it, one of it which is a portfolio of evidence which the teachers prepare themselves. I agree with you that they need to go to the schools, they need to talk to teachers, they need to talk to colleagues, they need to talk to students and families and all of that. I mean, we in Mexicanos Primero have for 9 years been evaluating teachers for a teacher award, and we spend several months reviewing evidence, going to the school, spending days at a time at each school, trying to understand understand what is going on in terms of the teacher and their practice. I think that it's also really important to inject in this conversation a little bit of reality about what's happening in terms of who are the teachers that are protesting. I think it's important to note that in Oaxaca right now, only about 379 out of 12,000 schools in Oaxaca are protesting. So that's less than 3% of the schools in Oaxaca. I think that if we want to talk about the leaders of the union in Oaxaca, I mean, I'm not sure that Ruben Nunez is involved in critical education when he hasn't even, we a year ago submitted a criminal complaint to the Mexican authorities about Ruben Nunez in particular and other union leaders in other states in Mexico who are continuing to cash their paychecks as teachers with federal money, being paid as teachers, but who do not show up in their schools. We documented that in a period of 10 months, Ruben Nunez was not in his school at least 60 days.
So but here's the thing. So ultimately, I mean, a lot of this debate comes down to the power of the labor union, the teachers' unions, and we have some comments on this. We actually just got a comment on Facebook Live about this. We have Rob Wood here who says, I fully support teachers in any country. However, unions have become part of the problem instead of collective bargaining groups. Just look at the salaries of the union hierarchy. But we also have this tweet that came in from Bibiana who says, it can't be favoritism in the union because they are the most persecuted and attacked union. Their leaders are jailed and their protests are suppressed. Vladimir, what is your sense of how much power the teachers' unions have in Mexico?
Well, especially the teachers' union in Oaxaca is one of the most powerful socially and in the numbers of the members. They have around 80,000 members all over Oaxaca. And yes, of course, they are one of the most powerful unions all over Latin America. So I think also to consider that the educational reform are not including in the evaluation exercises the cultural differences of peoples from Oaxaca, from Guerrero, from Chiapas, and that part of the context of a teacher. You need to understand that the peoples from Mexico, we are a mixture of identities, racial identities, that needs to be considered, that needs to be even evaluated to have a standard or a quality level. Yes, in the global sense, but you need to understand that the poorest people in Mexico has been always excluded, not only in the education system, but as every day you can see here in Mexico as the economical daily life. So in my opinion, yes, the corruption is endemic to the capitalist system, as Mexico is. So we need to change that with education, but we need to also to consider that historically the public education, the secular education, and the free education in Mexico survived. And there will be like this, and the protesters, the teachers.
Vladimir, as
right
you're
now.
Speaking, I'm reminded you have a daughter in public school there. What are her school conditions like?
Well, we are living in downtown Oaxaca, and the downtown Oaxaca schools are the privileged schools because, yes, we're running water sometimes. We are with electricity, almost paid by the state, even today. But we are with a lack of interest of the local government and the federal government to participate in the elaboration of the educational plans. So I guess that the educational reform are trying to understand that we, as part of the parents that are participating in the assemblies, we need to understand what the federal government are doing with their own money. That especially is not.
I want to explain for our international audience that these are assemblies that take place with the unions. Some say giving them then legitimacy. I want to throw something else out here, though, since we're talking about the unions. This is a video that shows allegations that the unions allegedly treat people differently when they accuse them of being traitors. John, I want to throw this to you. Have a look at public teachers being publicly shamed. This was in Chiapas in the south, and it's accusations of what happens when you cross the union. The union later said that these were infiltrators and it was not members of their own union. And as I was playing that, I was going to throw it over to you, John. But Marco said, is it possible to jump? Clearly, something about this is resonating with you.
Yeah, the problem is that we have a deep situation of corruption, both within the dissidents movement and the institutional part of the union. I mean, if we observe the budgets for education in the last 30 years, they have grown systematically in real terms, and unfortunately, we have at the same time the conditions that both John and Vladimir describe in many of the public schools, not only in Oaxaca, in Chiapas, and in other states not in the south. And why is that the case? Because unfortunately, many of the resources that are supposedly channeled to the education system are being used both by the authorities and the union for clientelistic practices that do not have to do anything at all on education, that are labeled under the education brand, but really not used for improving the education conditions of kids. And at the end of the day, I mean, what all this discussion seems to be forgetting is that the main goal for any education reform has to be to improve the quality of education that kids, that young people receive in public schools.
Right.
And that is the tragedy. I mean, we observe all the tests, not only the standardized tests, I mean, all the different instruments, and they are portraying a very deep gray image in Mexico.
John, I know you want to respond, but I just want to get our community in real quick, just to piggyback off the video that Malik had just showed a little bit ago. We also have tweets like Mario's over here, who says the government really isn't caring about the teachers' movement, but the way the teachers are trying to make things happen is just plain wrong. They've been blocking important areas and vandalizing. As you're responding, can you talk a little bit about whether you think the teachers are not responding always in the best way possible, maybe contributing to making things worse?
Sure, there are a lot of points here on the table.
First, a lot of points at the table, but about 2 minutes until the end of the show. So go for it.
That last video is a complete theater designed by the federal government, along with the organization which actually cut the hair of these supervisors belong to a local group which belongs to the PRI, which is the national political party to which Peña Nieto and Aurelio Nuno belong to. This was designed to affect the prestige of the teachers' unions. The union is not perfect, but this union in Oaxaca, La CENTE in Oaxaca, is much better than the national union, which is El CENTE. The national union is run by I would say, a bunch of corrupt bureaucrats who respond only to the orders of the presidency. The leader of that union, Elbester Gordillo, is today in jail. The Oaxaca leaders are not wealthy and they are not criminals. They are political prisoners. Jennifer, I would like to invite you, please, when you come back to Mexico City, to the Planton, where thousands of teachers are occupying the center of Mexico City. None of them receive any salary. For 8 months, they have had their salary cut off by the national government in punishment for their political activism. Let's go to Oaxaca. Why don't you visit the small, very humble houses of these union leaders? These union leaders come up from below. They are grassroots leaders who are defending the long tradition of humanistic education, and they are being killed and jailed. We have over 60 political prisoners today in Oaxaca due to this authoritarian government.
So an invitation there, Jennifer, is that something you would want to take up?
I think definitely. I mean, I think we also have to look at the facts. I mean, the teacher payroll is public information. Ruben Nunez has charged more than 3 million pesos in the last 5 years in paychecks. When the average teacher salary in Oaxaca is 10,000 pesos a month, he makes more than 5 times that, and he doesn't show up at his school for work.
Jennifer, a big allegation there, and that is all the time we have. Look, the fights are still ongoing. I want to thank all of our guests. This conversation will continue online. #AJStream. Omar?
Malika, I'll leave us with this tweet from Bibi that shows a graffiti message from protesters to police, and it reads, "Police, remember who taught you to read." Thanks everyone for watching.